This time looks different. And while every day certainly brings new breaks in this story, the larger issues are not actually about each detail, but rather the overarching dilemma of what defines the kind of abuse of power that should end a presidency. Now, in this special, we have a live debate on the two core questions in this crisis. One, are there grounds for the House to impeach the president now? And two, if so, is there a substantive case for the Senate to convict the president? Now, I want to tell you up front, those are questions about the Constitution and our system of government. They are not questions about anyone's feelings about Donald Trump. And if you're looking for political opinions on Trump, that's not really our focus tonight. But if you are looking for a deep legal and factual reckoning, we hope this could be the right program for you, because we're going to try to offer the context and the precedents that you might be bringing up with your friends as this whole debate continues to grip the nation, and that will matter whether your friends agree with you or not. So later in this hour, we actually have that debate with two of the leading legal minds in the nation. But we begin with today's weekend bombshell, this second whistleblower emerging, claiming firsthand intel on Trump's Ukraine plot. And by the way, this is not a random anonymous story that we've gotten just today. It looks quite credible because the attorneys for the first whistleblower are the ones confirming this brand new account and representing legally the new whistleblower, which puts heat on a president who is struggling to respond. Trump insiders saying there's no consistent message because the plan is whatever the president's whim is today. And that puts Trump at a disadvantage heading into the worst period of his presidency right now. Consider how in the usual battle for Sunday show dominance in these political morning shows today, we can tell you not a single member of the Trump White House represented him on television at all. And that's leaving people to improv and freestyle their explanations. And I got to tell you, this is one topic where it is hard to make sense going off the top of your dome, if you will. Some Republicans now saying the thing that Trump already admitted was serious, maybe it's just a joke.
George, you really think he was serious about thinking that China's going to investigate the Biden family?
I doubt if the China comment was serious, to tell you the truth.
I don't know if that's a real request or him just needling the press, knowing that you guys were going to get outraged by it.
So we have a lot to get to, but we begin with our panel for Trump and Ukraine with presidential historian Jon Meacham. Among his many books, there is Impeachment, An American History. I'm also joined by Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and NYU law professor Melissa Murray, who clerked for then Judge Sotomayor. Good evening to all of you. Thanks for being a part of our special, you guys.
Good to be here.
Gene, I start with you in Washington. They didn't need one more 2x4 to the head at the White House, but they certainly got it with a second whistleblower. Your interpretation?
Well, first of all, the first whistleblower was enough, right? In the first whistleblower story, it was completely supported by the information that was later released by the White House about what President Trump was doing with Ukraine. It was that revelation that set this in motion and that sort of flicked the switch in the House from we're not going to impeach to Nancy Pelosi deciding that the House had to move forward, politics be damned. And a second whistleblower, we don't know exactly what the second whistleblower has to say yet. It could be another bombshell. It could be something that profoundly deepens this episode, our knowledge of this episode. It could be something else about this episode. We just don't know. But we'll be finding out.
John, your view?
Well, I think that this was a break in the dam, the first whistleblower. It created a kind of safe space, if you will, a safer territory for people to come forward. Often that's the point of this kind of statute. If one brave person will speak the truth, it will embolden others. And so I love what you said a second ago about, this is not about feelings, it's not about opinion, it's about fact. One of the questions we have to resolve in the country, and we're kind of in an unfolding civics lesson about it, is are we willing to acknowledge fact for what it is, as opposed to interpreting it before we get to whether it's actually a real thing? And so many folks are, as Walter Lippmann said, we don't see and then define. We define and then we see. And one thing that I suspect happens as more, and I suspect more will happen, more firsthand knowledge, more information, I suspect it gets harder and harder for the reflexive defenders of the presidents to say there's nothing here.
Yeah, you mentioned reflexive defenders. Take a look at one of them who also is a target, which always makes an agent or lawyer's job more difficult. John, take a look at Rudy Giuliani.
The reason they don't want me on is they know something you're not reporting on. I've got it all.
All right.
I got it all.
Conversation will continue.
There's a lot more to come out. We haven't moved to Romania yet. When should we get to Romania?
John, I don't know that I want to get to Romania, but it's not my call.
It sounds like a Mel Brooks movie, right? Wait till Romania. If Mel Brooks had done programming for C-SPAN, there's a little bit of Art Buchwald, the great humorist, was never better than during Watergate. And as I think he later put it, he didn't have to work that hard. So the caricatures of folks that are unfolding here are also vivid. They're going to live forever. And what I'd say to anyone who's either going after the president or defending the president, this is the kind of period that we write books about and that shape generations of politicians. Watergate shaped a generation of politicians. McCarthy shaped a generation of politicians. The New Deal. You just go all the way back. There are these important inflection moments that live far beyond where we are. And I think we're unquestionably right in the middle of one of those.
Well, that brings me to Professor Murray, because there are the books that capture the history and the stakes. There are also criminal law textbooks and administrative law textbooks that are filled with the cases and the precedents that emerge from these types of crises. And hard cases can make bad law, but there may be some easy cases here, Professor. I wonder what you think not only about the question we tackle tonight, which is the evidence that is mounting for the House on impeaching the president, but also the exposure of other individuals, some by, according to Donald Trump's latest defenses, according to him, tattling on them.
Well, obviously, this is escalating and unfolding in ways that perhaps we don't even understand yet. But one thing does become clear, and as John said, the presence of the second whistleblower really does corroborate the secondhand testimony of the first. And this is a firsthand witness. That's really important. That adds fuel to this fire. More than that, it does provide cover for other people to come forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if we had new whistleblowers coming out in the next couple of days and weeks. In terms of past precedents and what we've seen before, we saw with Watergate that even as President Nixon chose to resign before he was formally impeached by the House, we still saw many White House aides actually doing federal time for their work in the Nixon White House. And so, again, it's never the crime itself. It's always the cover-up. And what seems to be part of the story here is a massive effort to cover up things that happened in this White House that were not only unorthodox, but perhaps even an abuse of presidential authority.
Yeah, go ahead, Gene.
No, I was going to say, keep your eyes, though, on the crime itself. I mean, because the thing about the first whistleblower's complaint is that it has been corroborated by evidence that the White House itself released. So if you just take the evidence that Donald Trump has given us, you have a sort of blueprint for impeachment right there. You have the withholding of the aid to Ukraine. You have the phone call, which is very clear to everybody. Now we have the text messages back and forth between people who are working for the president on Ukraine. There's a lot on the record already, and maybe the second whistleblower has something completely new, but you could just focus on what we already have.
And John, as our historian, I mentioned at the top of our special, your book on impeachment, I know it's early, so with all due caveats, where do the issues, the potential articles of this impeachment fit in your view, in the history, where we have a spectrum of the process leading to a president leaving office with Nixon, and then two other very different impeachments in the rare times we've gotten there in history?
I would say they're more serious than Andrew Johnson. The issues that surrounded the Andrew Johnson impeachment were existential. It was about white supremacy. It was about the verdict of the Civil War. But when Congress got down to brass tacks, they really kind of backed into something. And I'm not going to inflict the Tenure of Office Act on everyone on a Sunday. But just
you don't scare
trust
me. You don't scare me with your obscure historical legal references, Mr. Meacham.
Well, actually, as I think about it, this is the one place that would actually find that fun. So we found each other somehow. So they backed into that.
You already knew that.
So the issues of the Johnson impeachment, hugely important. When they actually got to impeaching him, not so much. And then Nixon, of course, was about abuse of power, using federal agencies for political benefit, using federal agencies to block investigations into political crime, break-ins and other things. This, and the Clinton issue, I think this is far more important. I think this ranks with or right above Watergate, just historically speaking. If you go, because think about it, this is what impeachment was created for. Put yourself back in 1787. You're in that hot summer, you're in the Pennsylvania State House, you're trying like hell to figure out how to make this thing work. No one, as Gladstone later said, the mind of man had never at a stroke attempted to do this, to create a government like this. They're incredibly wary of executive power, not least because of the king. The king was an issue too, but they'd seen royal governors. They knew that there could be abuses of power. They very much were anxious about following the well-worn historical path of an attempted republic that becomes a dictatorship. So what do they settle on? This thing called impeachment. Yeah. And they're very clear that it's not about, as Madison put it, maladministration. It wasn't a parliamentary system. It wasn't just, you know what, we disagree with him, let's impeach him and try somebody else. That was not this. This was not that. This was different, and it was about how do you protect the integrity of the system. They would have fully understood the idea of a president colluding with a foreign power in some way to achieve their own authority and their own power in the republic itself. That was very much in their minds. It's the reason there's in the Constitution you can't accept a title of nobility. You can't accept a gift of an office from a foreign power. Because we know how the story turned out. We know we've had a good run of 240 years or so, and God willing more, but they didn't.
You laid out, I hope people were listening closely to your point, because the core animating principle being not disagreement to cancel elections, but abuse of power that could endanger future elections. I mean, that you just hit the core of it. I'm going to lose John and Eugene. Melissa's staying for part of our special coverage. So, Gene, quickly before I lose you, my other question to you is, how do you think the special character of the president in this situation plays out? Because Donald Trump is someone who both lies constantly, I say that as a journalist, and then occasionally blurts out incriminating truths, whether that was at the dawn of the Mueller probe about the illicit motive for removing the FBI director during a different criminal probe, or as he has done recently here, given the Democrats tremendous evidence in what in law we call a voluntary confession, which is some of the most damning evidence you can get.
It provides a test. It tests the system, because here is someone who lies all the time, and as you said, sometimes blurts out important truth. So how seriously does the House, does the whole process take the defense? Oh, well, he didn't mean it, because he says a lot of things he doesn't mean. And so I guess we'll test the proposition of whether we can take the president's words seriously at all, which is a ridiculous question to have to ask about the president of the United States. I mean, that thing about taking Trump, seriously but not literally is, if you think about it, ridiculous. You cannot take someone seriously if you cannot believe a word they say, if you cannot put any faith in anything that comes out of their mouth. Yet that will be part of the defense. That's already the defense on the China question. Oh, well, he obviously didn't mean it. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it several times as if he were serious. And so the system's going to have to find a way to take that seriously and to distinguish between what's real and what's not.
That was his goal. I'm reminded, Gene, of Miley Cyrus If you mean it, I'll believe it. If you text it, I'll delete it.
Maya Angelou, somebody tells you who they are, believe them the first time.
Believe that.
I think that's the first time Miley Cyrus and Dr. Angelou have been quoted in the same paragraph.
Definitely.
We are in an unprecedented time.
So well put. Our special coverage is designed to take a pause from these crazy news weeks and really think it through. And I'm grateful to John and Eugene for helping us do that. And Melissa, please don't go anywhere because I want to get in deeper with you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.